Good morning, and thank you all for joining us here in the room and virtually. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm particularly honored today to welcome our esteemed speakers and guests today's conference. And I'm doing that not just on my own behalf, but also on behalf of Landon Durrance, the Senior Director of the Global Energy Center, and Jennifer Gordon, the Director of the Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. We're delighted that Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power is beginning a partnership with the Atlantic Council. We just signed the agreement a few minutes ago, and we're thrilled to co-host this important and timely event in celebration of our new partnership. We're fortunate to be joined by Dan Poneman, a member of our board, former Deputy Energy Secretary, and George David Banks, who will be speaking in a panel soon. We benefit every day from their expertise, and I look forward to hearing them share their insights on the nuclear energy landscape with us today, with Jennifer Gordon moderating. At COP28, and I was in Dubai for that, along with our Global Energy Center, the United States and South Korea were joined by more than 20 countries in the global coalition to triple nuclear energy capacity by 2050. That was a hugely important commitment. Government and industry leaders across the globe are recognizing the unique potential of nuclear technologies to deliver energy security and to support the clean energy transition. It's my view, and not only my view, that there can be no net zero without the contributions of nuclear energy. To support countries embarking on new nuclear energy projects and to expand existing nuclear energy deployment will require secure global supply chains, sustainable financing mechanisms, and robust multilateral relationships. The United States and South Korea share a long history of civil nuclear cooperation, and it's crucial for both countries to build on this relationship, and we hope to contribute to this as well. Investing in nuclear energy has been a clear priority for both President Biden and President Yoon. In the United States, the passage of bipartisan legislation, including the ADVANCE Act, reflects a growing consensus toward expediting domestic nuclear energy deployment. In South Korea, impressive commitments have been made to support the nation's nuclear power industry, including the planned investment of nearly $2.5 billion in new nuclear technology development. Building resilient energy infrastructure remains high on global national agendas, especially in the US and the Republic of Korea. I'm looking forward to today's conversations, which I anticipate will highlight the importance of continuing and expanding the close relationship between the US and the Republic of Korea. It's now my privilege to introduce Dr. Juho Hwang, President and CEO of Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power. Dr. Hwang has served in leadership roles across many of South Korea's most prominent nuclear energy institutions, and we look forward to learning from his insights. His CV is far too long to read here, but I think it's important to say a couple of things. One of them is KHNP, for those of you who don't know the Republic of Korea well enough, produces 30% of domestic electricity with nuclear power, hydropower, pump storage, new and renewable energy, such as solar power, wind power, and fuel cells. It is South Korea's largest power generation company. Dr. Hwang, I promise not to list your whole CV, but I always like to get the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific parts at the Atlantic Council. He received his Bachelor of Science in Nuclear Engineering from Seoul National University in 1982, and then a Master of Science in Medical Physics from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 1984, and a PhD in Nuclear Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 1986. We are continuing this US South Korean relationship and connection that has been part of your entire life. So thank you for being here today, and I'm now delighted to turn the floor to you.
Good morning. I am Joo Hwang, President and CEO of Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power. It is such a great honor to welcome Atlantic Council President and CEO Frederick Kemp, and Daniel B. Poneman, Atlantic Council Board Member and Distinguished Fellow of the Global Energy Center, and all the distinguished guests, both here in person and those joining online. I'm very pleased to co-host this workshop under the theme of Korea-US nuclear cooperation. Particularly, I express a deep thanks to the Atlantic Council for their hard work in organizing today's event. In last February, I had the pleasure of meeting with Mr. Kemp to discuss nuclear cooperation. We exchanged valuable insights on the global nuclear landscape, particularly in the context of US-Korea collaboration. I was deeply impressed by the Atlantic Council's profound expertise in global energy security and their exceptional ability to guide major discourse on issues. Our meeting has paved the way for the signing of today's agreement, and I am extremely delighted that our two organizations can contribute to strengthening the cooperation between the US and Korea. As our first cooperative initiative, we are hosting this workshop under the theme of US ROK nuclear cooperation. We are all aware that the surging energy demand is driven by carbon neutrality goals, energy security concerns, and advancement in AI and data center. And nuclear is under the spotlight again as a practical solution. Many countries are already expressing interest in nuclear new fields. At last year's COP28, states pledged to triple global nuclear capacity by 2050. That reflects a shared recognition that nuclear energy is essential in tackling climate issues and enhancing nuclear security. The challenge is whether we can meet the demand. It's a huge demand. Tripling nuclear capacity can only be achieved if regulatory frameworks, supply chains, and workforce are sufficiently developed. And for newcomers, the guidance of leading nuclear countries is also essential. Therefore, we must establish a cooperative system to address several key areas: supply chains and workforce development for nuclear construction and operation, and technical innovation and regulatory harmonization for SMR development. Additionally, we need to ensure reliable fuel supply, strengthen non-proliferation measures, and uphold export control compliance to support the peaceful use of atomic energy. To respond to the evolving business landscape, cooperation among capable countries are more critical than ever. At the forefront should be the US and Korea. I am confident Korea is a competent partner to the US in the areas I mentioned earlier. First, KHNP has been continuously building nuclear plants for the past 5 decades, since the construction of Gori Unit 1 started in 1971. As a result, KHNP is equipped with highly experienced workforce and robust supply chains. Despite the challenges caused by varying energy policies, we remain competitive thanks to both the government and KHNP's efforts to sustain the supply chains. Second, we are developing ISMR, which is the abbreviation of innovative SMR, to keep pace with global trends. We are also working on SSNC, which means SMR-based smart net zero city, a self-sustaining energy city model that relies on the SMR. Moreover, we are collaborating with the key US SMR players such as ARC and TerraPower and etc. for investment, manufacturing, and construction. Third, in terms of fuel, we have signed an agreement with a US company, Centrus Energy, to ensure stable supply of fuel for our existing domestic fleet and ISMR in the future. KHNP is also exploring the possibility of direct investment in fuel facility in the US. Lastly, non-proliferation and export control regimes are prerequisites for the peaceful use of nuclear power. Korea has been a model country in this respect. We are committed to providing education for the newcomer countries to promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We will expand these efforts through the International Non-Proliferation Center, which was launched recently. In this regard, I hope we can cooperate closely with the Atlantic Council. So far, I have provided a brief overview of the competitiveness of KHNP and our current cooperation with the US. I believe there is a much more beyond what I have covered today. The experiences and insights that we are sharing in today's workshop will help us align on the importance of our bilateral cooperation and guide us in setting our joint goals. I wish the scope and depth of our cooperation will continue to grow. Once again, I deeply appreciate the Atlantic Council and our distinguished guests for making today's workshop possible. I look forward to more constructive conversations like this in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And I'm so delighted to be here. And first, I want to thank Dr. Juho Wong and Fred Kemp for also being here and for starting us off this morning with our conversation on the US ROK nuclear energy cooperation future. I'm also, of course, so delighted to introduce today's fireside chat. First, the Honorable Dan Poneman, Distinguished Fellow of the Global Energy Center and the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council, and Dave Banks, who is a partner at Capital City Ventures and who is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. So, Dan, I'd like to start with you because both Fred and Dr. Wong mentioned the need to triple nuclear capacity by 2050 and the announcements from last year's COP28. So, Dan, if you could please give us a sense of how you see the future of international civil nuclear cooperation and, crucially, the cooperation between the United States and the Republic of Korea.
It's a great question. And first of all, let me thank you, Jennifer, for all your hard work at the center. And Fred's leadership has been awesome. And it's a great pleasure always to see Dr. Wong. My only complaint about Dr. Wong is he said everything I was going to say, but he's always thinking ahead. This is an incredible moment. And you heard from Dr. Wong, the tripling pledge that came through last year, I think actually that tripling pledge did not fully, frankly, recognize what's happening out there. And let me just bring this down to a small country, the United States. In March 2023, the Department of Energy, in their commercial liftoff for advanced nuclear report, said that we would need 700 gigawatts of new generation by 2050 to meet US net zero goals, of which 200 could be advanced nuclear. That's a whole year ago. More recently, like within the last 2 months, they came up with a new commercial liftoff report on geothermal that said, did we say 700? We actually meant 900 gigawatts, 200 gigawatts new demand in a year. Now you have all of these hyperscalers with enormous appetite for power, but also deeply committed to ESG objectives. So nuclear must be there. Enter US ROK cooperation. You know, as Dave and you both know, and I'm very proud of, we have been invited to be at the Scowcroft Center too. So my background in all this is national security. And I've been working with our friends in the ROK since 1991, when I was working for General Scowcroft and President Bush. That's important because the bonds that tie the US and the ROK are bonds of blood. We shed blood together in a war. When I was working on this in my early days, many veterans were still among us. Through that strategic alliance, we have the extended deterrent that ties our countries together, which has been recently reinforced when Dr. Wong and I had the opportunity to sign a memo of cooperation in April 23 in association with President Yoon's visit to President Biden. The whole Washington Declaration reinforced and strengthened that extended deterrent and our alliance. And that is the chapeau under which the commercial opportunities arise. It is truly impressive. I'm not just saying it because of the format, to see, and I visited Corey many years ago, what Korea has done over many decades in developing the supply chain, the construction capability, and many of the skills and attributes and assets, the heavy forgings and so forth, that they have developed complement the design, instrumentation, and fuel opportunities that are present in the United States. At a time in the world when dominant export power has been Russia, this provides us not just an opportunity, but I would really say an obligation in the service of climate change, in the service, as Dr. Wong said, of nonproliferation, to deepen and strengthen that cooperation. I'll close by saying, therefore, welcome reading this morning the very exciting news from Dr. Wong that they have signed a further cooperative agreement with my former company. And I think this is only another step along the road to what I think could be a hugely beneficial cooperative relationship in which working together, the United States and the ROK and our companies can supply reactors and fuel around the world.
Dan, thank you so much.
Dave, I want to pick up on some of the themes that Dan mentioned. Talk to us a little bit about the role of nuclear energy in geopolitics. When we think about great power competition, what's the role of nuclear energy? Why does it matter? And what's the role of partnerships like the US Republic of Korea alliance?
And by the way, thank you, and it's great to be here. And look, I mean, I've been a proponent for a long time for strengthening the alliance with the ROK, with a focus on the partnership on civil nuclear energy. And just give you a little bit of context here, because I think it's important to talk a little bit about history and kind of how thinking has evolved here in the U.S. Because, you know, the U.S. is not, let's just be honest, is not the best partner at times. There's a tendency to be a unilateral actor at times, right? And I think we've gone through this process of internalizing that we need to work more closely with our allies, like Korea, especially in areas of mutual interest like civil nuclear energy. But so Dan, you've been working on this for much longer than me. I guess I started working on this around 15 years. And when I say this, I mean sort of the link between our civil nuclear program and U.S. national security interests. And at the time, I just come out of the Bush administration, and I was working with a nuclear utility, and to develop sort of a concept paper on this link, which later was published by CSIS, I think in 2013, and it plugged all the progress that the ROK had made in civil nuclear energy, and it stressed the importance of increased cooperation. But it's interesting because when we first started talking about this, that we had a major issue with our own civil nuclear program. It was in decline. We needed to figure out how to resurrect U.S. leadership. There were all these national security interests. We were risking sort of letting China move forward and develop a monopoly over the technology and services. A lot of folks just kind of looked at us and shrugged, right? They just, they just didn't quite sort of appreciate that. So the good news is today, I think that there's widespread consensus here in the U.S. That there is this national security link between our civil nuclear program and U.S. defense needs, et cetera. And I think that a lot of that acknowledgement has resulted in increased bipartisan cooperation up on the Hill. That's something pretty new, right? I mean, over the past 5 years, there's been kind of a meeting of the minds between Republicans and Democrats on the importance of our civil nuclear program and its link to national security. And so we've seen a lot of sort of support building for federal programs that can support our civil nuclear agenda. But when you're talking about, and by the way, and importantly, so 15 years ago, a lot of folks would have looked at investments in our nuclear program as a question of how much does that electron cost to put on the grid? So it's a much broader conversation today, thankfully. But when you're looking at the big geopolitical issues, right, you can put them in a couple of buckets, right? And one of which would be the link between our civil nuclear program and our defense needs, right? So, I mean, clearly, the U.S. defense needs require supply chains that are supported by our commercial nuclear program. If we didn't have a robust civil nuclear program, that's going to increase costs for our defense. And there's also the recruitment piece, right? Where clearly for folks entering military service, it's a much easier sell for people who are interested in the nuclear Navy if there are opportunities outside to work. So the second big piece here would obviously be the link between the health of our civil nuclear program and our ability to shape global nonproliferation policy and global safety standards. Well, it's not a huge leap. It doesn't take a lot of thought to realize that, look, you have to, if you're not selling it, if you're not making it, if you're not selling it, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of influence in shaping the global policy. And again, I think this is where the partnership with South Korea is incredibly indispensable because, I mean, again, if we don't sort of change the trajectory and get our house in order and figure out how to strengthen our partnership and alliance on nuclear issues, and not just with Korea, but with Japan and France and others, we're going to have, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, and you can say if you think otherwise, but we're going to have this development of a Chinese monopoly over global supply chains as it pertains to nuclear, just the way we've seen China game it out and gain control of supply chains related to other industries. So yeah, so it's incredibly important for us to work together. And by the way, if it's not a Chinese monopoly, maybe it's a Chinese-Russian oligopoly. And so it's important for us to recognize this. And again, the U.S. needs South Korea.
Dan, do you want to jump in?
I can't resist. The last thing Dave said, I want to pick up on that because this is where our alliance relationships, our national security relationships, and our energy requirements and opportunities merge. When there was a very important rapprochement between Tokyo and Seoul, and we had the summit at Camp David and a number of meetings that ensued, one of the areas when Dave was talking about cooperation in respect of what's happening with China and Russia in the global market. If you don't have exports, you don't have influence. It's as simple as that, right? Russia's order book was $130 billion of reactors. After the United States Westinghouse finished the Sanmen Haiyang projects, our order book was zero. We're working on it now, as people know. The fuel side is the most strategic aspect. And if, because of the United States advantage when it comes to uranium enrichment, we could merge our efforts with the ROK and yes, bring Japan in, we could form a kind of backstopping opportunity to supply the whole world's market with enriched uranium, prevent the proliferation of dangerous enrichment facilities popping up in countries all over the world, because we would have satisfied the demand requirement, and strengthen the alliance, strengthen our business, strengthen our manufacturing, strengthen our supply chains. And oh, by the way, at a time when Russia has 44% of the world's enrichment market, China has 10% of the world's enrichment market, that's 54%. So if we learned anything out of the dependence that we found ourselves in the 1970s on OPEC oil, and then we found ourselves a few decades later on Russian natural gas, we should have learned you can't have that kind of dependence over your critical supply chains on which your economies depend in the hands of potentially hostile parties. That's why I think it's really an imperative for the US, ROK, and Japan to merge together on a kind of enrichment cooperative of this character.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both.
And Dave, in a moment, I want to come back to the point you made on bipartisanship and nuclear energy policy. But Dan, I want to stay with you for just one more moment on the fuel topic. Talk to us specifically about the importance of HALEU in all of this and the fuel supply chain.
It's a very exciting moment, not only because of the great demand that we're facing, but because of the growing recognition that decarbonization goes beyond electrification and the decarbonization of the grid. As everyone here knows, that's about a quarter of our emissions come out of power generation. You got to get industrial processes and so forth. So one of the really interesting aspects of HALEU is that it can support this new generation, the so-called fourth generation reactors that don't use liquid, that don't use light water coolant, that use liquid metal like the TerraPower design, or high temperature gas like X Energy, or molten salt. And in doing so, you can produce, for example, out of these gas reactors, much higher outlet temperatures of steam that can support industrial processes, hence the very exciting announcements that we have seen between X Energy and Dow. Not only that, but you get with these advanced reactors many intrinsic benefits that Dr. Wong could probably write a thesis on, in terms of, obviously, metal has a higher melting point than water, and therefore you're able to operate these advanced reactors at ambient pressures. That removes a lot of the dangers in terms of operating at high pressures. You have the ability of some of these reactors, such as the TerraPower design, to actually use as its fuel material used fuel and burn down the minor actinides. So there are waste management benefits. There are just tremendous capabilities that are produced only in these fast spectrum neutron-based reactors. And then that brings us to the requirement for HALEU. And as it stands today, the only supplier of HALEU in the world at a commercial level, up until Centrus began performing this enrichment last October, was Russia. So here we are back again, dependent on one country that does not share our values, does not share our interests. And so I think that the HALEU opportunity, now that you do have a U.S. company with an NRC license and now a growing customer base, that I think is interesting, because the nature of the centrifuge technology allows you to produce out of the same machines not only HALEU but also LEU. And so when you take the large stable demand for low enriched uranium, which can be the backbone of a business model, and then you add on to it the still uncertain but very exciting HALEU opportunity, now you've got a holistic approach that can allow what we need in this market to go beyond just the fuel question itself, Jennifer, but to the structure of the market, what you want to have for the sake of low energy prices and increased nuclear viability is a diversified supply chain. Now, right now, at a commercial level, LEU is only supplied by state-owned enterprises. We got them in Russia, China, France, and Europe has Urenco. We now need, I think, and this I think feeds right back into the US ROK partnership and alliance, an opportunity, and again, I would say an obligation, a moral responsibility to add another supplier, an American supplier, to that supply chain, supplying, yes, HALEU, but also LEU.
Dan, thank you so much.
Dave, I want to go back to you. You were recently in Korea and you were talking about US politics and climate and trade policy. Give us a sense of where you see US Korean cooperation heading and also a sense of the international climate and trade agenda.
Thanks. Well, so obviously there's a tremendous amount of interest in in the U.S. election and election scenarios and how they potentially impact energy, climate, trade, manufacturing policy, right? And I think that for my host in Korea, I mean, there was a lot of concern generated by, for example, the Trump campaign's announcement that they would impose a 10% tariff across the board. Maybe now it's 20% tariff across the board. And I think that, look, I mean, I think that for us here in the United States, we tend to kind of forget, exactly, what the vulnerabilities are for some of our major partners and allies. And of course, Korean economy is incredibly dependent on exports. What is it, like 35% of their economy is exports? And so, and then of course, in the first few years of the Trump administration, you had a lot of concern about, is the United States going to pull out of the free trade agreement? There was a renegotiation with some tweaks, but I still think that's kind of hanging over folks' heads a little bit. But I'm pretty optimistic about the economic cooperation, but regardless of the election outcome, I think that I mean, if you just look at the numbers, for example, when it comes to Korean investment in the U.S. economy, last year I think it was close to $80 billion, I think, and I think that it represented about 45% of all Korea's foreign direct investment. Helping the United States resurrect its leadership in manufacturing. So I think that's been a huge advance, and I think that it does a lot in sort of building the friendship between the United States and Korea. But look, I mean, if you look at that FDI number, that $80 billion, I mean, just think 20-something years ago, I think the 2000s was around $3 billion. So there's been just a huge advance in economic integration between the two countries. So, I will say this. So when it comes to the economic integration piece, look, that is certainly strengthened, and it goes back to what Dan, you were saying, by the political and security alignment, right? And how both countries are becoming much closer in cooperation in Asia Pacific and with North Korea, with China, with figuring out the response for all that and the important role that Japan and other allies play in that. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. So I don't think people should be as concerned as they currently are. On the international trade and climate front, I tell people this is where the policy is headed for the United States. You've got the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. The UK is following that. But here in the US, there's growing bipartisan support for a merger of climate and trade policy that's being driven by the acknowledgement that, or the belief that the United States has been treated unfairly in the global trade regime, that countries have taken advantage of the United States, have pursued unfair trade practices, one of which could include lax environmental standards, enforcement, compliance. So that's kind of generating support for a U.S. carbon border adjustment, okay? Both Democrats and Republicans. So that's where it's headed. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like, but that's where it's headed. And then the question is, what does this mean for Korea? Well, we're talking about the importance of exports to Korea. So any type of trade policy that it introduces kind of a new element should be an important consideration. But if you look at the numbers, so and this is a slightly older report now. In 2020, Climate Leadership Council produced a report called America's Carbon Advantage, and it has data related to important U.S. trading partners, and it compares U.S. carbon efficiency vis-a-vis them. The Korean economy, and this 2020 is based on some 2015 data. So if anything, if you were to do an update, probably the gap between the two has increased in favor of the United States. But at the time, it was about 2 times more carbon intensive. The Korean economy is about 2 times more intensive than the U.S. economy. Now Japan, at the time, it was about equal, right? So pretty close to the U.S. carbon efficiency. I mean, what that means is obvious, right? I mean, if you have a U.S. Climate and trade policy design that's focused on emissions intensity and performance and doesn't give exemptions for countries that it has free trade agreements with, then Korean exports are at a competitive disadvantage compared to Japanese exports into the U.S. economy. Now, I would submit that this creates a more robust argument for further investment in Korea's nuclear program and clean energy transition in general. But that's a whole other topic. It's complicated set of issues that we could get into for another day. So if people are interested in that, happy to talk to you offline. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. And well, you brought up the fact that we have a U.S. election coming up around the corner. So I guess now we have to talk about it. Dan, you've watched and you've really had a front row seat and been a part of that evolving bipartisan consensus on nuclear energy that Dave mentioned earlier. You've served at the highest levels in both Democratic and Republican administrations. So as you look towards the election, what does it mean? What would a Democratic or Republican administration mean, in your opinion, for the future of nuclear energy in the United States and globally?
Well, this may seem counterintuitive, but I think the answer is fortunately not much. Okay. I cannot imagine any other issue that commands the level of bipartisan support that this one does. And it's important because everyone here knows that anything with the nuclear word in it only operates successfully over a multi-decadal framework. And whatever you think about politics, they do change parties in power from time to time in the Congress and in the administration. So any policy to be robust, to be executed, to be successful, has to be supported on a bipartisan manner. In the US Congress in 2023, they passed the Nuclear Fuel Security Act 96-3. 96-3. I don't think you could get 96 votes to say the sun rises in the east, right? This year, the Advance Act, 88-2. That's in the Senate. On the House side, you have people, and I know, we are all of us often engaged with Congressman Chuck Fleischmann, who's chairman of the subcommittee on the Appropriation Committee that deals with these nuclear issues. He chairs 6 nuclear caucuses, and they are widely attended. It was through leadership, not just really on the Senate side, but on the House side, that the $3.4 billion overall that got into uranium enrichment happened. So I think this is a promising area to continue. Obviously, in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the Advance Act, you saw the great support that you had in the Biden administration for nuclear. Prior to that, the implementation of the Advanced Reactor Development Program really kicked off during the Trump administration. And you have not just at a matter of political parties, but you have, I'm proud to say, in our world, in our industry, you do have people who over decades are committed to these same causes. And we have, if you will, an ecosystem that I think will continue to support it. So with champions like Congressman Fleischmann on the House side, Chairman Warner, who convened a whole group of CEOs last May, I have a high degree of confidence that no matter what happens in November, that the support we have seen on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of Capitol Hill and at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue will continue.
Dan, thank you so much. So with the assessment that nuclear energy is the only topic that would get 96 votes, I want to turn to Dave. Dave, you are one of my favorites, or maybe my favorite Republican.
One, you know.
Um, spin us out a little bit more on the implications of a Republican administration for nuclear energy.
Thanks. And by the way, I agree with 100% of what you said, Dan. Clearly we're in a very different place than we were just a few years ago, and there's very, very deep, substantial support for the U.S. civil nuclear program. Period. So yeah, look, if Trump's reelected, yeah, I think that you should expect to see a really pro-nuclear administration. Let's talk about the first. Let's call it the first term, since we're talking about a Trump 2.0 scenario. But at the beginning of the Trump administration, you had a lot of folks, in senior levels, the White House and across the agencies, who were very, very, very pro-nuclear. Some of this was driven by concerns over the Westinghouse bankruptcy and the problems we were facing with the reactor builds in Georgia and South Carolina. But a lot of people forget the fact that Trump actually had a presidential initiative related to civil nuclear, and it was a civil nuclear energy review that looked at reviewing challenges, problems that the program faces, and then looking for a set of policy solutions. Now, there was some success there. I think that there was hope that there could be more. But I got to say, and maybe you were kind of alluding to this a little bit, but there's only so much you can do in the executive branch when it comes to especially shifting U.S. policy and adjusting it to what I would consider to be the existing paradigm. I think my opinion is that we're in an old paradigm. We're still our policy is based, on what the world was like, 50 years ago, or whenever it was, when we had a monopoly over nuclear technology and services, and that there needs to be a new paradigm. That's really hard to do when you're in the executive branch, because a lot of this is based in statute, so existing law. And then, of course, when you're sitting in the executive branch or in the White House, you don't have a lot of time to do innovative policy, right? You're trying to run or manage the government, and you're trying to support interagency cooperation. You're trying to put out fires or start fires, depending on how you look at it. So there's not a whole lot of room there. But I think that this is going to have to happen on the Hill, right? And I'm not a huge, I don't know. I'm not incredibly optimistic that it's going to happen in the House, because the short election cycles and the fact you've got really rigid hierarchy when it comes to committee structure. So it's just not conducive to innovative policymaking. I think it's going to happen in the Senate. So if we're going to have support for developing new innovative policy related to nuclear energy and nuclear energy cooperation, I think that's going to have to happen in the Senate. And I actually think that we're on track to do something like that. I think it's only a matter of time. Thank you.
Dave, thank you so much. I think we're almost out of time for this discussion, but just wanted to offer the opportunity for closing thoughts on the future of civil nuclear cooperation between the United States and Korea. Dan?
I think we have to rise to the occasion. I think Professor John Mearsheimer said, life's too short to work on B problems. So this is an A problem. And as you know, my last book was focused on two existential crises. One, the potential of catastrophic climate change, and the other, the potential of catastrophic nuclear obliteration. And these trends are converging right now. We haven't talked about it in this session, but this is, in my judgment, the most dangerous moment we've experienced in terms of the possibility of nuclear annihilation since 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis. You have Russia rejecting all arms control. We're going to find ourselves out of New START. You have China coming up with its modernization program. So we're going to end up with basically two, not one peer competitors. You have, regrettably, the theaters of risk have now extended beyond the classic sea, air, and land to space, outer space, cyberspace, all turbocharged by AI. This is the stuff of science fiction and the bad kind, right? At the same time, you have worries on the demand side of the proliferation equation. You know, what was the lesson, I'm sorry to say, of basically Ukraine having given up its nuclear weapons and what happened to the Budapest Memorandum? So the whole structure, I think, in terms of arms control is under stress. At the same time, we've been spending this whole conversation, I don't have to repeat, on the climate side. So now is the time for countries that are, as I said at the beginning, conjoined by blood shared in the defense of freedom and in the deterrence of hostile aggression from totalitarian forces. If this is not the time for countries like the US and ROK to double down on the cooperation, which I think got a really strong, robust imprimatur from both presidents in last April's Washington Declaration, and to leverage the new opportunity out of the spirit of Camp David at a trilateral level, we would have missed a historic opportunity. So I think this is the time. I'm very excited and grateful from what I heard this morning to Dr. Huang and his incredibly talented team, who's I see here today, and the new cooperation between KHNP and the Atlantic Council, I think is exactly the right kind of combination of talent and dedication to this very important topic. And, oh, there it is, future of US ROK civil nuclear cooperation. So I would say let it begin today.
Dan, thank you so much. A very sober warning, but also a terrific call to action. Dave, closing thoughts?
Yeah, and thank you, Jennifer. And I think the Atlantic Council has played a really important role in advancing this, again, the link between our civil nuclear program and national security interests, but then also the need for the United States to work more closely and align its policy with those of our allies and close partners when it comes to nuclear energy. And again, at the very beginning, I mentioned kind of the tendency for the United States to pursue unilateral action. I think that's going to become less and less so as people up on the Hill and policymakers just internalize the fact that the United States, in this case, cannot check China, and especially if it's China-Russian oligopoly on its own, right? And that we're going to have a really close working relationship with our allies and partners, but particularly with South Korea. Thank you.
Dave, thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I feel like we could continue this for another hour, but please, everyone, join me in thanking Dan and Dave. And now I'm delighted to invite everyone to enjoy a brief coffee break in the foyer, and please come back for our panel discussion at 10:30. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the resumption of our program on the future of US-Korea civil nuclear cooperation. Again, I'm Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And I'm so delighted to be moderating this next panel on the role of industry and nuclear energy innovation. I'm happy to introduce our panelists for this portion of today's event. Mr. Irfan Ali, who is Chief Strategy Officer at ARC Clean Technology. Mr. Sean Albert, Vice President for Corporate Business Strategy at Centrus Energy. And Dr. Yongsoo Wang, Professor of Special Affairs at KEPCO International Nuclear Graduate School, King's. Irfan, I'd like to start with you. Talk to us a little bit about your work at ARC Clean Technology, and how do you see the role of international civil nuclear cooperation, especially between Canada, the United States, and the Republic of Korea?
Jennifer, thank you for that question and for the opportunity to participate in this panel today. So ARC is a clean technology company headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we are engaged in the process of designing and developing an advanced SMR called the ARC 100. The ARC 100 is based on what's called SFR technology, sodium fast reactor technology, and it benefits from the EBR2 program significantly, right? So for reference, the EBR2 program was a program funded by the United States government through DOE that was administered and operated by ANL. And it entailed an SFR that ran successfully for over 30 years, produced electricity, and without any major incidents. So the ARC 100 is based on that technology, and we are engaged in commercializing that technology in a form factor that's designed for multiple use cases. So at one end of the spectrum, you might have baseload electricity generation or dispatch. At the other end, you might have combined heat and power applications, CHP, and anything in between. And then at the same time with a global outlook. So what we've recognized from the beginning that in the need for clean energy is particularly acute in the developing world, right? So our intent was to have a platform that could be deployed over a wide geography and address a variety of use cases, and that's what we have achieved with the ARC 100. In support of this global outlook, we recognized Canada as a very effective early market for us to enter. And that premise was borne out when we established a relationship with NB Power. NB Power is a provincial crown corporation in the province of New Brunswick, and it's one of 3 nuclear utilities in Canada. So, and NB Power has been a wonderful customer. Their plan is to deploy the first ARC 100 at a site called the Point Lepreau nuclear site. And in support of that objective, they submitted what's called a license to prepare site, something specific to Canada, last June. And then now the next major milestone is license to construct. And we're working closely with NB Power towards that objective. At the same time, we announced another project in Canada that's based in Port of Belledune, also in New Brunswick, a deep water port, where the focus is very different. The focus is on creating an industrial site that at full development could have as many as 10 ARC 100s deployed, right? And the use case there is the production of green hydrogen and then the subsequent production of green metals and ammonia for export to Europe. Right, so that project is in early stages, but also going well. Recognizing that to fully support this global outlook, we would need a set of close strategic global partners. We have established a couple of deep relationships in Korea. We have a relationship with Carey, for instance, that goes back several years. And Carey, of course, has tremendous expertise in SFR development, given that they have worked closely with ANL in this process. And then more recently, we've announced 2 agreements with the KHNP, focused both on the short-term project-specific and longer-term for strategic cooperation, right? So, of course, KHNP is a global leader in nuclear deployment. We feel fortunate to have this relationship with KHNP, and we expect good things from this relationship. And as new developments happen, we will go public with them.
Irfan, thank you so much. Sean, give us a bit of an overview of your work at Centrus and how your company is working to establish a domestic supply of advanced nuclear fuel.
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this forum. I must confess, in my past life, I worked for Dan Poneman when he was Deputy Secretary, as well as with Dave Banks while we were both at the White House. So I feel that many of the points I expressed this morning have seeped into me through osmosis. But at Centrus Energy, for those of you that may not know, we are the only U.S. enrichment company employing a domestic U.S. enrichment technology. We have our roots that go all the way back to the very dawn of the nuclear age in the 1940s. And we are working hard to expand that domestic enrichment capacity at our manufacturing facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and our operating plant in Piketon, Ohio. In the context of high-assay LEU fuels and advanced fuels, we are the only, as Dan Poneman mentioned earlier, we are the only NRC licensed facility in the world capable of producing and actually producing high-assay LEU fuel. The only other commercial provider right now is Russia, and for obvious reasons, reliance on Russian fuel is not going to be a viable path forward going into the future. And so what we're doing right now is we are in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy to operate a demonstration facility producing HALEU fuel for use by the U.S. government. Under that contract that we have with the Department of Energy, we were required in our first phase to produce modest quantities of HALEU fuel, which we already accomplished in October of last year when we commenced production. And now we've moved into phase 2, where we're required to produce just under a metric ton of HALEU fuel for the Department of Energy. We expect to complete that second phase of the contract soon, and then the Department of Energy may exercise its own option to extend that contract for a series of 3-year extension terms thereafter, each year producing 900 kgs of high-assay LEU fuel. The fuel is provided to the Department of Energy under this program, and then the Department of Energy will decide how to distribute the fuel in accordance with its HALEU consortium. Now, this is the first step, and I think everybody in the room and in the broader advanced reactor community recognizes that we need much more capacity, much more expected capacity, to help provide the fuel that it's going to be needed by my partners here at ARC Energy and many of the other advanced reactor developers around the world. Now, as we work to establish that supply chain, the nature of the game for uranium enrichment is scale. Scale of deployment helps drive down the overall costs for the production, and that's where the announcement that we made this morning with KHNP for the offtake of low-enriched uranium is so important. Because one, it's an expression of confidence in the strategic nature of the relationship between Centrus and KHNP. It reflects a strategic, it's a reflection of the strategic nature of the relationship between our two countries as we look to address these supply challenges moving forward, vis-a-vis the challenges that we face in Russia and China. And so as we look to embody to implement these supply commitments, they have to be done in recognition of a public-private partnership. And now the U.S. government has taken steps, various countries have taken steps around the world that recognize that new capacity is going to be needed through a public-private partnership in order to achieve the goals that I think we all share in terms of fuel. As we move forward with these commitments, as we scale up for production, we expect to be able to provide the fuel that's going to be needed to power the next generation of these reactors, both here in the United States to demonstrate, but also with partners such as Korea and others in Canada and around the world.
Sean, thank you so much. And I want to continue on that international partnerships theme once we get back to you in a minute. But Professor Wong, I want to go to you now. Tell us a little bit about your work and how you see Korea's efforts to triple nuclear by 2050.
Actually, we are not officially claimed to triple our nuclear capacity, but we will do our best to support the active dissemination of the commercial nuclear power plant in the global society. So that's our motive for this kind of global effort. And we are very eager to work with the United States and our allies throughout our future business. For example, we'd like to work with many US brilliant joint venture companies developing the SMRs. We see a bright future of the future generation for reactors, which might use higher enriched uranium, like 10% or 12%, or HALEU for the fresh nuclear fuel. And we'd like to support the technical development of the some generation for reactors. And also we'd like to help the full supply of the EPC, engineering, procurement, and the construction of those new advanced reactors for the global market. And we have one good strength in Korea. We are non-nuclear weapon state. So we know the values of the nuclear export system very much. And we are the good guys to abide by the current so-called 3S principles: safety, security, and safeguardability. we are the real international workhorse to promote those principles. We'd like to further expand our effort for the global society, especially for the newcomers. We'd like to disseminate the culture. So as mentioned by our Professor Dr. Zhuo Huang, we are now establishing the so-called International Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Cooperation Center in my school. So currently we have a lot of international students, mainly from newcomer states, Africa, Southeast Asia, Eastern European societies, and the Middle East. So they are very eager to learn the implementation of the nuclear energy. But we see another point. We have to encourage them to really understand why we are trying to establish the combination of the safeguard, security, and safety as a team from the beginning of designing nuclear power plant. So we will do our best to work with your people to disseminate that kind of culture. It might take a lot of mistakes, but we'll do our best. Otherwise, we will have uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, whenever we try to export some nuclear equipment to the global market. As we mentioned yesterday, we have a big competitors in the global market, Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. In order to discourage the effort of a potential nuclear proliferation, we should develop the very strong relationship between the United States and South Korea. So we need a team effort, not only for the technology development, but to develop all the political and the social framework as a one team. So for example, what if we'd like to export ARC 100 system throughout our potential corporations? Then our potential global market might be in Africa or in the Middle East. Do you want to allow ENR in the Middle East? No. So we have a lot of accumulated experience throughout our export in UAE and throughout the operation of all the nuclear facilities inside Korea. So US can lead all the framework, and we can actually team with the US to further disseminate all the cultures and the technical details like drone attack, cyber security, and the vital area, and all other measures as a one team. So I believe that's our mission, and now we are ready. Actually, nowadays, the KHNP would like to have a strong leadership combined with the US government and the civilian societies to further promote this kind of philosophies to the global market. That's all I just say.
Professor, thank you so much. Irfan, we talked earlier in the previous discussion about the bipartisan consensus around nuclear energy, and I think it's fair to say that if the industry has a wish list on policy, we've seen a lot of that wish list fulfilled over the last several years. But what are some of the next policy challenges, or what's next on your wish list, on the industry's wish list, as the United States and our allies move together to deploy the next generation of advanced reactors?
So, Jennifer, I would offer 3 items, right, that are on our wish list. The first one, by far the most strategic, is a closed fuel cycle, right? So as a developer of an advanced reactor, a fast reactor, we have always been strong proponents of closing the fuel cycle, right? So 2 primary reasons. One, financially, it makes a lot of sense, right? So in our case, we have a reactor that's a 20-year fueling cycle. And we run the reactor at a breeding ratio of slightly under 1. So what happens is that at the end of the 20 years, you have almost as much fissile material in the core that you did at the beginning. So if we could extract that core, the used core, and through an incremental investment of new nuclear material, recycle that for the next deployment and be able to repeat this over multiple cycles, the economic benefits of that are tremendous, right? Secondly, the societal benefits of closing the fuel cycle. One of the biggest concerns, criticisms of nuclear energy is related to spent fuel, right? And of course, there is an accumulating amount of spent fuel. But if we could close the fuel cycle, then we would be able to take the spent fuel and rather than treating it as waste, be able to recognize the full value of it and reutilize it, right? So we are strong proponents of a closed fuel cycle. Now, the good news is that over the last few years, there has been a shift in public stance. Even the Department of Energy has stepped up with new initiatives in recycling, and pyroprocessing, of course, is a wonderful option. It's a mature technology. We know how to do it, and that family of technologies could be the way this gets done. So it's been good to see a shift in the public stance, including the DOE, where now reprocessing, recycling as an option is discussed more frequently. We would like to see that in some form of a formal policy stance or position by the U.S. government, and then subsequently followed up by some specific legislation in support of that policy stance. So that'd be my number one. Number two is, one of the challenges that we face. So we understand the challenges that we have to overcome in taking the technology from technology to product, right? So we know, so there are a set of known unknowns that we're in the process of addressing. One of the biggest challenges that all of us advanced reactor vendors have is the transition from FOAK to NOAK, first of a kind to nth of a kind, because in that process, we are expecting to encounter a number of unknown unknowns that could, in fact, raise the risk profile of the associated projects. So support from the U.S., from the government is important. We are thankful to the U.S. government for the ARDP program that DOE administers. We are one of the recipients, beneficiaries of that program. We received an award as a part of Pathway 3, which has a date of 2035 as the deployment of a FOAK in the U.S. So we would like to see continued support from the government, including the United States. And some of that support would have to be financial in nature, just because this transition from FOAK to NOAK is a challenging one. Then the last item I'd mention is the regulatory harmonization, right? So we are one of the few vendors that is going through a simultaneous engagement with two regulators. So in Canada, we work with the CNSC. We have completed our submission for the VDR Phase 2. We are expecting a report back from CNSC at some point. That will be a significant milestone. At the same time, as a part of our ARDP award, we are engaged with the NRC in pre-application engagement. We have had a number of meetings with them, and we're planning some more. So to the extent that vendors like us don't have to duplicate our efforts, that would be very beneficial, because as you can imagine, this is a stringent, time-consuming, expensive effort with a good objective in mind, which is to ensure nuclear safety. But nonetheless, to the extent that we could eliminate or minimize duplicate effort, that would help us a lot. Now, there is a lot of discussion. The IAEA is taking the lead on this, but some kind of a framework, a globally accepted framework that allows vendors like us to reuse some of our submissions in one jurisdiction in a different jurisdiction, I think that would be tremendously helpful.
Irfan, thank you so much. Really appreciate those three items on the wish list. Sean, you concluded your previous remarks by touching on international civil nuclear cooperation, the importance of partnerships. Talk to us a little bit more about how international partnerships can help to strengthen the fuel supply chain.
Sure. Good question. I mean, there's a bilateral aspect to these international partners. And then there's multilateral aspects as well. I mean, obviously, we're sitting here in the context of a seminar focusing in on US ROK civil nuclear cooperation, and the announcement that we made today, Centrist and KHNP, is a perfect reflection of the types of bilateral, commercial to commercial, international partnerships that are going to be critical in order to help deploy the capacity that we're going to be needing to supply both the existing fleet as well as the next generation of advanced reactors. There's a broad recognition, and this was touched upon in the previous panel, about the need to move away from both Russian supply and over-reliance on Russian supply. As Dan Poneman said, 44% of global capacity in the enrichment space is provided by the Russians. but as well as recognizing the dangers and the risks that are involved in swapping out reliance on Russian supply for Chinese supply. The reason why we're in the situation we are is we've been relying on this supply for far too long, and it's going to take time to remedy that situation. In the international space, I think we've seen lots of discussion and lots of commitments made by many different governments around the world, individually and collectively, that reflect upon the fact that we're going to need to enableize and catalyze international partnerships to address this challenge. So we've got the tripling nuclear energy pledge that was alluded to earlier. We've got the commitments by the Sapporo 5 governments, and there's many other ones out there. They reflect the urgency of the problem and the scale of the problem that we face going forward. I think what I would say in response to this, though, is, and I'm speaking frankly here, declarations of and expressions of intent are great. We need to figure out how to translate them into action and translate them into urgent action. If we're going to hit a 2050 pledges relating to 2050, Dan Poneman talked about 200 gigawatts of new nuclear needed to be deployed in the United States on top of it maintaining the existing fleet that we have. If you expand that globally to the countries that have signed up to that pledge, you're looking at between 1,200 and 1,400 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. I think everybody in this room and everybody in the broader civil nuclear energy community understands that those are very bold goals. We need action to help support if we're going to get anywhere close to those goals. And I started off the conversation about, or the answer to your question, about a US ROK commercial partnership. Kind of what I had in the back of my mind, and when I was thinking about this event earlier in my past life in the Department of Energy, I was the lead Department of Energy official that was involved in the US ROK 123 agreement negotiations that came into force in 2015. And I recall all of the optimism that we had at the time in both coming to agreement and then coming to agreement upon a new framework for cooperation that reflects where we are in terms of the overall relationship between the United States and Korea in 2015 and where we want to go going forward. Within that structure, there is a high-level bilateral commission that is structured to help facilitate at a senior government to government level these types of conversations that we want to carry on into the commercial space. I had the privilege of working with Deputy Secretary Sherwood Randall and then Deputy Secretary Briette in the first two of those meetings. I think everybody in this room understands that, like family members, there's differences of that we need to work through right now. And I would encourage, in the context of both international partnerships as well as bilateral partnerships, that we, on both sides, work through the structures that we have in place to help achieve the optimistic goals that we had when the agreement came into force in 2015.
Sean, thank you so much. Irfan, did you want to jump in?
No.
Okay, perfect. Professor Wong, I wanted to ask you, talk a little bit about some of the fuel types that you're looking at and talk about their different purposes.
Yes, that's quite important. So we are now talking about advanced SMRs, which might use the different type of fuels, tricer fuels, metal fuels, sometimes molten salt fuels. We have to be very careful to optimize our future SMR designs with the technology and all kinds of geopolitical issues. Nowadays, you are talking about the fresh fuel supply, which is very important. But eventually, we will end up with the problem of spent fuel management in foreign countries, newcomer countries. How to assure the global non-nuclear security issues? It's a very, very critical issue that we should work from 10 years ago, not today. We do not have that kind of framework effort at this moment. That's the reason why we are trying to have a good partnership with the Atlantic Council, not Atlantic Coast Conference. Yes, unfortunately, my school and Stanford, my enemy, joined ACC somehow. We used to be the Pac-10 members, and we are very proud of the Rose Bowl game with the winners of the Big Ten conference title holders. Everything is changing, except for the relationship between United States and South Korea. So Temperman proudly claimed the bond of blood this morning. And yesterday, we met many brilliant US gentlemen claiming that their fathers were serving for the Korea right after Korean War. So we have a good tradition, and we know the need from the US side. And the US understand our capability as a good supply leaders. So to choose the proper fuel type, we should work now. That's very important to create a new market. We understand that there are more than 80 venture companies for the SMR development. So they desperately need a new market as early as possible. But in order to create a new market, we should be very careful. So at least my personal suggestion is to work on the SMRs with the solid fuels. And we'd like to minimize the stay of the spent nuclear fuel above ground against the potential drone attacks and the so-called missile attacks from the non-state actors, while securing the more safety throughout the permanent disposal. So we have a lot of the golden opportunity to work together, not only to choose the proper fresh fuel type, but also try to develop the better way for the final disposal of spent nuclear fuel.
Could I just add something to the fuel discussion? So Jennifer, this is, when we talk about the nuclear supply chain, when we talk about expanding the global footprint for nuclear energy, fuel's a critical component of that, right? And when you have the withdrawal of as substantial a supplier as Russia from the market, then that effect is going to be felt globally, right? And we are at the leading edge of that effect because we need HALEU, right? And prior to these developments, Russia was the supplier of choice for HALEU for all of us advanced reactor vendors. So now that that's no longer an option, all of us are now looking for alternatives. And I'd like to commend the U.S. government for stepping into this breach. And we're a part of the HALEU consortium. The team at DOE is doing some very good work in trying to bring up the supply of HALEU to the appropriate level. So the first requirement there urgently is to stabilize the supply of nuclear fuel, both HALEU and LEU, right? And I think this is where the announcement that KHNP has made with Centrus goes a long way. This is, if you take Russia out of this mix, this is a limited supply market. So having a player like Centrus in that market should be helpful for all of us in the long term. So that's one item. The second one is what the professor said. We have to balance, even as we recognize the value of expanding the global nuclear footprint, particularly to the developing world, which has a very acute need of clean energy. We have to balance that with the latent proliferation concerns that are all valid, right? And in striking that balance and coming up with the appropriate balance, we need a consortium of global players who can make that happen. And I think KHNP, given its presence as the premier nuclear deployment and project company in the world, has a key role to play, right? So I'm glad this discussion is happening, and I think this is the kind of effort that will be needed to address this problem.
Irfan, thank you so much. Sean, did you want to jump in on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about this issue. The analogy that we like to make in terms of the HALEU space is the fuel form, we supply the fuel, the market will dictate the proper fuel forms. We need to understand, though, that as we're deploying new technologies, that we need to do so in a responsible manner. You talked about the 3 S's that are critically important. And in the context of that deployment, we need to figure out a way to both accelerate the timeline for demonstration and accelerate the timeline for deployment such that whether it be Korea, United States, Canada, elsewhere, that vendors, whether they are utilities, whether they are process heat applications, that vendors have a set of products that they can make selections. There are dozens and dozens of technologies currently under development right now. And I don't know which one's going to make it to market, and I don't know which one is going to be best suited to meet all of these different demands. But we've got to figure out a way how to accelerate that timeline in a manner that's consistent with the highest standards of safety, security, and non-proliferation.
Sean, thank you. Professor, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I'd like to just say seeing is believing. So we have to construct any kind of a pilot scale facilities as early as possible. So I understand that KHNP is very ready to start the construction of the good pilot scale demonstration facilities in the global societies. And based upon the safe operation of that kind of a pilot scale facilities, we can disseminate that kind of technology to the global market. So that's the reason why we should work together as a team. So we will try to have a continuous cooperation with the Atlantic Council and all of our participants, which would like to eager to have a golden opportunity to disseminate the real peaceful application of nuclear energy for the global market.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I just, to build on the point, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation like this, you know, from the enrichment perspective, when we sit in front of panels like these or talk to potential customers or government officials, one of the statements that's made to the enrichment community is, why are you not deploying? There's a clear demand for these products. Why are you not deploying capacity right now? Companies like ARC and others, they need the fuel. Why are you not deploying? And this is where we need to figure out a way to have a more complete and in-depth conversation with government decision makers so that they can understand better the incentives that are in place from the commercial side. And I think we're seeing a lot of progress in that, and that's where these commercial partnerships and programs like the Department of Energy's ARDP program and the various RFPs that they have out currently for HALEU and deconversion and LEU enrichment are so important. Because the way that the market operates is we deploy capacity based on customer orders. And as we are still in the development and demonstration phase of many of these technologies, it is hard to justify the investment of enrichment capacity to satisfy a pilot scale deployment or a demonstration scale deployment. We need orders. That's where the government side of a public-private partnership is so important, and that picks up on the point that I was making earlier about the urgency in order to do this, because the longer that we wait in deploying the enrichment capacity needed for HALEU fuels to demonstrate the ARC reactors or to demonstrate any of the other advanced reactors that are out there for demonstration, the longer it's going to be before we move to the deployment stage, which everybody understands we need to do yesterday, let alone today.
Thank you so much. And really, really appreciate that point on needing the demand signal. I do think, however, that as we look towards the future, I think there's cause and reason for optimism. And Irfan, just before we began this panel, you and I were talking about next year with the Canadian presidency of the G7 and really using that as an opportunity, I think, to build on the Sapporo Agreement and, you know, and to really showcase everything that the nuclear energy industry has done. So in that context, what would you say is next for ARC, and how are you looking towards the future of the industry?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So, you know, in terms of Gen 4 technologies, right? Just to share some context, SFRs or sodium-cooled fast reactors are by far the most advanced option, just because we have so much operational experience behind them. I use the example of the EBR-2 because it's the most relevant to us. But beyond just the U.S., there's been global activity related to to SFRs that have added to our cumulative knowledge base. So the SFRs are by far the most advanced. The challenge that we face now for SFR deployment is what I mentioned before, the transition from FOAK to NOAK, right? So how do we take technology that's fairly high on the TRL scale across the board? Now, there might be individual components that are a little bit lower, but in aggregate, the SFR technology is fairly high on the TRL scale and relatively much higher than all the other Gen 4 options. So our challenge now that we're focused on is effectively making the FOAK to NOAK transition, right? Now, at the same time, what I'd also like to mention is, of course, a lot of attention and focus goes to product and technology development, as it should. At the same time, what we're finding is the development of a new business model in the global market, and particularly in the US. So it used to be that nuclear energy or electricity was treated as a public resource that was generated and distributed by utilities for a large geography, right? That is now changing, where we're beginning to see the emergence of single customer or limited customer PPAs or EPAs, depending on the application, and a trend that's being driven very hard by the data center market in the US, right? So, I mean, I think everybody recognizes that this is a market that is going through significant change, and the change is not just growth in volume, right? So this is a part that is important. The data centers themselves are changing in a fundamental way, right? So it used to be a traditional data center where you just had classical computing shared over large geographies. Now that classical computing environment is migrating to GPUs for AI. And then right behind that, or at some point behind that, is going to be quantum computing, which also has huge energy requirements. So this is a market that has significant growth potential to it. But the business model is going to be different. The business model is going to be one of one customer PPAs or limited customer PPAs or EPAs, and we're beginning to see that, right? So even with some of the larger reactors, you know, the Amazon announcement in Pennsylvania for the Susquehanna nuclear plant, that's a good example. And then, of course, X Energy with Dow in Texas, that's another example. So we are excited by this emerging market, this emerging business model. Our reactor, the ARC 100, is particularly well suited for this market, right? So at a form factor of 100 megawatts to 200 megawatts electrical, with an outlet temperature of 510 degrees C, this reactor, the system's very well designed to address exactly that kind of an application. And we would like to focus on that in the next few years for a global deployment. Jennifer.
Irfan, thank you so much. Sean, we talked about the bipartisan policy consensus that nuclear energy enjoys. We also, on the previous panel, talked about the US presidential election that's coming up around the corner. What are you looking for in terms of US policy within this context?
So, you know, as the previous panel alluded to, we are in an unprecedented age of bipartisan consensus support for nuclear energy. I don't want to say that there is a growing recognition. The recognition is there, and it is real, that nuclear energy and civil nuclear energy stands at the intersection of climate change and clean energy, energy security, and national security, which is great. And I do not envision, whatever way the presidential election turns out, that awareness and that consensus is going to go away. What does concern me, and it picks up on the point that I raised earlier, is the sense of urgency that we need to capitalize and move forward on. The threat and the challenge is real, and we need to move out right now. One thing that I would like to stress in the context of the presidential election and where we go moving forward, you know, Dave Banks in the previous panel, you know, raised the concept, and this is something that he and I have talked about in the past, of new paradigms being needed to address the new and growing challenges that we face. You know, the Atomic Energy Act in the United States came into force in 1954. The last wholesale revision of the Atomic Energy Act that took place was in 1978. It is a dramatically different world right now. And in the context of new paradigms, I think we need to take a step back and think about what is the architecture that we need going forward. In the enrichment space, The challenge that we face from a centrist perspective is that there are very high barriers to market entry because the enrichment community is dominated by companies that are either state-owned or state-backed. And I think that's a recognition of the fact by other governments that the nuclear sector and civil nuclear energy is a strategic sector. And so in the context of that consensus, we need to figure out how do we address the growing demand for fuels in a manner in which the market is different than it was decades ago. I also would pick up on a point that my colleagues raised earlier in the context of the strategic nature of nuclear energy. The Nuclear Energy Institute calls on, in the enrichment space, the need for a diversity of enrichment suppliers of supply from a diversity of suppliers. We need more suppliers in the market. If we accept the fact that there are high barriers to entry, then we're going to need more public-private partnerships in order to incentivize new deployment of new capacity from new providers such as Centrus. It's just a simple fact. These are expensive companies. These are expensive processes. They're not in the millions, they're in the billions. And in order to invest in that kind of capacity into a market in which there are state-owned and state entities, you have to have a public-private partnership. And I look forward to whatever way the election turns out, that the consensus that we have right now that recognizes this reality so that we can move forward in an expeditious manner to get the capacity deployed that we need so that we can facilitate the deployment that we all want to see.
Sean, thank you so much. Professor Wong, I want to go back to something that Irfan mentioned. You talked a bit about the data center market. Tell us a little bit about how you envision the next generation of reactors playing a role in smart cities of the future, and talk a little bit about industrial uses in the provision of baseload power and flexible energy supplies.
That's a critical issue to actually implement all kind of SMRs in the near future. So you often mentioned that we have some problem of the first of kind and then nth of kind transitions. It's always money talks. So how to maximally use all the electricity as well as the high heat source is the critical component. So that's the reason why we are studying very expensively about SSNC concept, SMR, Smart Net Zero Cities. So there, we'd like to have the multiple use of the heat resources for metal and the chemical companies and some other data set companies also, cool down the coolant, something like that. So you have to understand how to control all the different temperature heat resources for the entire new city. So we are very fortunate to develop that kind of technology inside Korea. So we recently complete the construction of our center, which demonstrates the main function of the main control room of the SMRs, and the AI center to collectively gather all the information to further optimize the operation of the future SMR. So that kind of technology needs a lot of different aspects of the technical issues, cybersecurity, because there we'd like to maximally use the combination of solar, wind, and the nuclear power as one team. Then, of course, you have to develop the good technology for the load follow concept, which might require the real-time data acquisition from outside. Then you end up with another problem of the cybersecurity. So we are now dealing with all kinds of technology issues for this kind of development. So we are completing that kind of concept, and we will demonstrate to the global society. So we got a lot of requests from the global society, from the Norway, Denmark, about how to deploy the smart net zero cities. So even though it's very complicated, when you can develop the highly advanced heat resources throughout your further development of SMR, it will be very good to harmonize your own technology of the reactor with that kind of a very advanced system to properly manage all kind of heat resources. Then money talks. Then we'll have another opportunity to create a better market for the global society. So as you might know, there will be a good exhibition in Barcelona, Spain, at the beginning of November. So they are working, trying to find out what's the real concept of the smart city. They don't care about nuclear energy, solar power. They would like to choose the best option. And that's the new market that we'd like to penetrate into with your colleagues. So we will see the progress.
Well, thank you. And thank you for bringing up cybersecurity. I feel like we should reconvene another conference just to talk about that issue. And unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, but I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to just give closing thoughts on the future of US-Korea civil nuclear cooperation. Irfan.
Sure, Jennifer. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate on this panel. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we've always had a global outlook, and in support of that global outlook, we've recognized the need for strategic partners for a variety of reasons. And of course, we recognize that Korea, given its rich legacy of nuclear development, of SFR development, and then the extensive experience that KHNP has in developing new projects and operating them, we recognized early that a key part of that consortium for us would be Korean-based, right? So, and as indicated, so we've had a relationship with Kerry for a long time, and beyond just the development expertise that Kerry has, Kerry also has testing facilities. So they have a facility called Stella that would be quite useful to us in our testing process. And then, of course, the agreements that we have entered into with KHNP. The focus of this effort, Jennifer, is global. And as I mentioned, beyond just the nuclear, it's also on the fuel side, because you really have to address both pieces to ensure a reliable, stable supply chain, right? And I think KHNP's agreement with Centrus is very timely. This is a time where someone like a KHNP stepping into this market could bring a level of stability to the nuclear fuel supply that I think is important. So we applaud that. We recognize the long-term potential of that, and we look forward to working with both KHNP and Kerry in our future development.
Irfan, thank you. Sean?
Thank you. Just to pick up on a point made by Dr. Wang, the nuclear ecosystem has evolved. The traditional customer base of utilities looking to buy nuclear power to provide electricity is not the only paradigm out there. We're looking at a multiplicity of different purposes, whether it be for process heat for industrial applications, whether it be industrial purposes, whether it be data centers, whether it be oil and gas. There is a multitude of different customers out there that reflect the fact that the civil nuclear energy in the marketplace has just evolved dramatically. And in the context of that, and to kind of bring it back in my thinking, that just ever more underscores the need for a robust and in-depth and renewed relationship between the United States and Korea to address all these matters. We are global leaders. We are global supply chain leaders, and we've got decades of experience in working together to address these challenges. One of the analogies that my Korean government counterparts used during the negotiation of the 123 agreement was that the overall bilateral relationship between the United States and Korea is like a three-legged stool. And there's three pillars to that overall relationship. There's the security relationship, there's the free trade relationship, and there's the civil nuclear energy relationship. And it's incumbent upon us at the government level, and it's incumbent upon us at the private commercial level to do everything we can to strengthen the civil nuclear leg of that three-legged stool.
Sean, thank you so much. And Professor Wang?
Yeah, my last point is very simple. We need a true friendship between United States and South Korea to further disseminate peaceful application of nuclear energy. We learned a lot from the United States. We owe a lot to the United States. So that's the reason why we'd like to continuously contribute to the global application of the nuclear energy. And our first step is to encourage and to support the production of the commercial enrichment facilities in this country as much as possible. Because without securing the supply of fresh fuel, we cannot compete with the Russian Federation and China. So we have a big competitors. So in order to compete against those two big countries, we have to have a step-by-step approach. The first step is to secure the fresh fuel supply, followed by the technical cooperation and the financial cooperation together with all the SMR creators in the United States. So we should work as a team. I'm sure that everybody has the same vision in this room. So we should act from now on as a one team. And we'd like to have a continuous collaboration with the Atlantic Council for implementing that kind of big vision for all kinds of human beings in the global society.
Well, thank you. And I think that this is a wonderful note for us to end on, and I especially appreciate the reminder of the broader context of the geopolitical competition, but then also the importance of the friendship between our two countries. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists. I want to thank all of our speakers who participated today, and I want to thank you, our audience, and those of you tuning in virtually as well, and especially thank our partners at KHNP for today's program. And now I'm delighted to invite everyone to please join us for lunch in the foyer. And thank you all again, and I hope to see you all soon.